All right, welcome back to the Big Texas Podcast presented by Texas Young Republicans. I am your host, Jordan Overturf, bringing to you another candidate who is out on the campaign trail trying to convince Republicans in Texas 26 that he is the man for the job. But before we get there, a little bit of housekeeping to get to. Man, what a crazy week last week was. And I don't think, based on what is up ahead for the next few months, that it's going to slow down anytime soon. Tuesday is the primary in New Hampshire. Maybe we'll get further clarity on Iowa with all the results coming in. But certainly the Democrats are in disarray right now. And that is when Republicans should make sure that we are as organized as possible and we are ready for the fight ahead. To that end, make sure you are following Texas Young Republicans on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at TexasYRs. You can also go to our website, texasyr.gop. Find out information about upcoming deployments we'll be having as we get ready for November. Also have plenty of information about early voting starting here in Texas on Tuesday, February 18th. That's the day after President's Day. Basically 2 weeks of early voting. There'll be some weekend voting there before the March 3rd primary. This is when we need as many Republicans as possible to get together, show up at the ballot box, cast your ballots so we can see just how strong the Republican majority is here in Texas. Democrats are going to use the primary as a high watermark, and they will continue to ramp up their voter registration efforts. We are certainly doing that here at the Texas Young Republicans in concert with our friends at the Republican Party of Texas, Texas Federation of Republican Women. All of these coalition groups are banding together to try and register as many Republicans as possible. So it's too late for the March 3rd primary, but that's all right because we are months and months away from the October deadline to register for the November general. That being said, we have a very long list of Republican primary candidates. And I want to be sure as we go forward, if you've been listening and tuning in, we have said before, these interviews are not endorsements. This is not about us propping up one candidate over another. We try to get every candidate in a race on if possible. Certainly, if you want to come on this podcast, hit us up, Twitter and Instagram at Big Texas Podcast, or send us a message on the Texas Young Republicans Facebook page. I am always happy to talk to candidates about the issues that voters want solutions for. We talk a lot about what is happening in our country, the rhetoric, everything that is distracting us and keeping us from moving down the road. And I want to continue those conversations with candidates here. So that's what this forum is. It's not about endorsements. It's about continuing the conversation and bringing about solutions to our issues here in America and in Texas. My guest today has got a few solutions of his own, including term limits. Jack Wyman is running as one of four Republicans in Texas 26. This includes incumbent Dr. Michael Burgess, who has been there for about 18 years now. Jack Wyman thinks that 18 years is enough, and he says that the voters he's spoken to in Texas 26 agree. This is up in North Texas area covering Denton and portions of Tarrant County, I believe. Corrections Department will get me if I am wrong on that. But in any case, as always, I am talking too much. I'm going to let Mr. Wyman explain to you why he thinks he is the man with the plan in Texas 26. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Jack Wyman. Thank you for joining us. You're getting real close to early voting. How are things going out on the campaign trail for you?
Things are going very well, Jordan. I am very excited and encouraged by the response we've been receiving from voters all across the district. I think there is a great desire to see positive and constructive change. I think people feel that 18 years is long enough for anyone to serve in Congress. My opponent wants 20 years, but I am finding that voters are saying 18 is enough. And so I'm picking up a lot of support, and I'm grateful for that.
Now, you're in a pretty stacked primary there. You've got, what, 4 total folks running on in this district?
That is correct. We have 4 candidates. We have the incumbent and 3 challengers.
Excellent. And so talk to me a bit about this district, covers portions of Denton County. What is it about this district that made you want to run for Congress?
Well, I don't think this district is being represented as well as it could be. I think we need a strong, bold, and courageous voice in Washington that is speaking out without apology and without compromise on behalf of the conservative values that have made Texas an American great. That is what I am promising to do. And I think the incumbent, in addition to having served nearly 2 decades, which is long enough, has not always been, in his votes and his statements, reflective of where a majority of the people in this district are politically on these issues. For example, my opponent, Michael Burgess, was the only Republican in the entire Congress, House and Senate, to vote with Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats to lower the national voting age to 16. I mean, that was a reprehensible vote. It made absolutely no sense. It played into the hands of the Democrats, and we have known, Jordan, it is no secret that the Democrats want to lower the voting age because they think they can get more votes that way from these teenagers who do not have the sound judgment or the maturity to be voting in national elections at the age of 16. He also, Michael Burgess, placed his name as a co-sponsor on a red flag gun control bill that would empower about 23 bureaucrats in Washington who would be unelected, unaccountable, unanswerable to the American people, or for that matter, to Congress. They would be appointed by the Secretary of Homeland Security to set up a surveillance of the American people that would make China envious. And why he put his name on that bill, I have no idea. He calls it a threat assessment bill. I call it a red flag bill. And I say that the only threat that needs to be assessed is the threat that his bill poses to law-abiding gun owners. And I support the Second Amendment very strongly and without compromise.
So what do you say to voters in this district?
Those are just some of the...
So what do you say to voters in this district who are clamoring for some sort of resolution to the gun violence in our country?
I think we have to focus on the problem of mental health. We have a mental health crisis in this country. We have not devoted the resources, the time, or the attention to solving it. I think that we need to focus on that and to make sure that people that do pose a genuine, authentic threat to public safety are interceded with and are helped and are prevented from committing gun violence. So I think that is one of the things we need to do. We need to enforce also, Jordan, the laws we have on the books already. We need to make sure that, for example, the background checks that are already law in this country are enforced and are followed. I mean, we have adequate laws already on the books to deal with this issue. Those need to be obeyed, and they need to be fully enforced, and they need to be comprehensively implemented. But we do not need any additional gun control laws. If gun control laws, in and of themselves, could actually reduce gun violence, the city of Chicago would be the safest place to live on earth. Instead, it is one of the most dangerous. And it has a high rate of gun violence. And the same is true of other cities and other places in our country that have enacted very strict gun control laws that have not curtailed gun violence in any way. There was an old saying when I was your age that if we outlaw guns, only outlaws will have guns. Those who are intent, and that is still true today, those who are intent on doing harm to others and sometimes to themselves will find a way to do that. They will find a way to get guns, regardless of the law. And so I think we need to focus on those areas of current enforcement and our mental health problems, rather than passing more restrictions on law-abiding citizens.
So this week, there was a ton of news about, obviously, the end of the impeachment process as the president is found not guilty on both articles. The State of the Union, everything that kind of went on this week, and kind of have Republicans feeling positive about going forward in the future. As you look at the news of the day, do you feel like Republicans are achieving the things that they want to achieve right now?
I think the Republican Party has a great opportunity to do very well in this election cycle. The president has a very impressive record of achievement. We have record low unemployment across the board. We have record low unemployment among women. We have record unemployment rates among Latinos and Black Americans, African Americans, and I think that those are very impressive economic statistics. Overall, across the board, in all categories, but just generally, we've got the lowest unemployment rate at 3.5% that we have had in half a century. The president has led in the area of energy independence. And now America is an energy producer instead of an energy consumer. And we are no longer dependent or held hostage, shall I say, by the Middle East geopolitics and individual nations that have been oil producers. We remember, at least I do, back in the 1970s when it was very much the opposite of what it is today. We were hostage to wildly fluctuating prices, depending on what these Middle Eastern nations wanted to do. We were at their mercy. No longer. President Trump has declared it to be his goal to make America the number one energy producer in the world. And of course, the state of Texas is the number one energy producer in this country. So Texas is leading America in energy production, and America is leading the world. That's a very impressive record. The president has also made America respected in the world again. He has successfully waged a war against terror, including recent killings of leading terrorists, Soleimani and Rami. These people were planning attacks on America. Soleimani has had the blood of over 600 American soldiers on his hands, and so the president skillfully and strategically removed him. It was a bold move, and it was a complete success. So the president is doing great in the war on terror. And I
don't think Republicans will disagree with you in terms of how the president is performing, but specifically in your race, right? I want to come back to the energy production thing, because Denton County, and specifically the city of Denton, has really struggled with how the local constituents there want to deal with fracking and the operations that go on there. What would you do in your capacity as a congressman to work with local officials and local residents who have concerns about energy production happening in, not a stone's throw from these neighborhoods? They're trying to.
We have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I, as a congressman, I would listen, of course, to all concerns. You have to. I would represent everyone in the district, not just one party or one point of view on an issue. I think you have to be open-minded. However, having said that, I would tend to be very aggressive and very bullish on energy exploration, oil and gas exploration, including fracking. Horizontal fracking has opened up vistas for us in terms of oil and gas that we had not known before. And I think that's good for our economy. It creates jobs. It provides low-cost energy, which helps us not only at the gas pump, but in other areas of our economy as well. And I think it helps all Americans. If there are specific issues in Denton County that that have to be addressed with regard to fracking. Of course, as a congressman, I would be open to hearing what those are and to resolving them in a way that made sense and was just and fair. I'm not suggesting that we should run pell-mell over the local concerns. What I am saying, however, is that, again, coming back to the president's leadership, I think previous administrations have made it difficult for us to become energy independent. The president has changed those regulations, and I support that. So I would be supportive of it strongly. At the same time, I would listen to local concerns. I think anybody who's in Congress, no matter what party they're in, no matter where they stand on energy, needs to be responsive to the concerns of local constituents. That is vital. That's essential, and I would be. On the impeachment, Jordan, I want to quickly say this. I have believed that this has been a partisan witch hunt from day one. I'm glad the president was exonerated. I knew he would be. We wasted a lot of taxpayer money on partisan revenge on the part of the Democrats in Washington. And anyone in Congress should have known this from the very beginning. And they should have taken strong stands on this. Michael Burgess, my opponent, was rated by Texas Monthly, and he was the only Republican member of the congressional delegation in Texas so rated as gutless when it came to defending President Trump on the issue of impeachment. And he said to the Record Chronicle about halfway through this fiasco, this fraudulent impeachment process, that while he had not seen anything yet that would persuade him to vote to impeach President Trump, he said, quote, and this is a direct quote, "I'm not saying I couldn't be convinced to change my mind," end quote. I think that my opponent, the incumbent congressman, was not sufficiently strong on this issue or outspoken. And I think that that's why we need a stronger and more courageous voice representing North Texans in Washington.
Okay, but it sounds like that you want a stronger voice representing President Trump. I mean, obviously your constituents support the president and get behind him, but it sounds like you're more critical of Congressman Burgess not being a loud enough advocate for the president.
I am concerned that we need a stronger voice on all issues across the board, not just with regard to President Trump. I cite that as an example. It was just it's one. But I think when it comes, if you step back and look at the broad issue, I think the people that are controlling the debate in Washington right now are the leftists. I think there's the socialists. AOC is a freshman congressman. She's basically running the Democratic Party. And she has received massive coverage. And if you look at where Bernie Sanders and Liz Warren have been in the contest for the Democratic presidential nomination, they have been very outspoken. And I think we need more champions of conservatism in Washington. And I think that we need to push back on the trend toward socialism in this country. I think we are seeing this on our college and university campuses. I think we are seeing it in Congress and the House of Representatives, particularly with the Squad and others who are really, I think, dominating the debate. And I think that we just need a more courageous, and I think we need a bolder advocacy for conservative values and traditional values in Congress.
Now, you've been on the campaign trail for a while now. Besides impeachment, border security, some of these bread and butter issues, what are some of the other topics that voters are bringing to you and that voters are sharing their concerns about?
Well, they're mentioning term limits a lot. They're bringing that up to me without me even mentioning it. And I find overwhelming support for congressional term limits among the voters that I have spoken with. And I have spoken with a lot of voters. And those who are supporting us in our campaign are finding the same thing when they knock on the doors of voters. I think people feel that Congress is resisting term limits because it is in their best personal interest to resist term limits, but it is not in the best national interest to resist them. So they feel that there is a disconnect between voters feel that there is a disconnect between their lives and their needs and their priorities and their concerns and career politicians in Washington. I don't think the Founding Fathers ever intended for people in Congress to serve 15, 20, 25, 30, or 40 years in office. George Washington really set an example with the presidency, as you know, when after 2 terms, which were 8 years, he voluntarily walked away from the presidency at the apex of his popularity. He could have served as president for life. He could have held that office as long as he wanted to. But he said, no, I want to set an example. I want to set a precedent. I realize that everything I do as the first American president is going to be likely followed by my successors. And I think 8 years is enough. And what's amazing, if you study presidential history, which I have, that the first time that was broken was that precedent was broken was when Franklin Roosevelt ran for a 3rd term in 1940, when the United States was on the precipice of getting involved in World War II. So there were extraordinary circumstances. Roosevelt ran and he was elected to a 3rd and, of course, a 4th term. But then after that, Congress and the American people, through constitutional amendment, limited presidential terms. So the Founding Fathers, I think, assumed, and maybe they shouldn't have assumed that, human nature being what it is, that people who served in Congress, in the House and the Senate, would serve a reasonable period of time, and then they would come back to take up the professions that they had left to serve in Congress, and they would live under the laws like everyone else that they had enacted. They never envisioned that people would be up there and would make a lifetime career out of serving in Congress. My opponent had indicated when he first ran, Michael Burgess suggested, at any rate, very strongly, that he would not serve, beyond a reasonable period of time. And now here he is, and he's wanting 20 years in Congress. And I think 18 years is enough, and I'm finding that voters are in agreement with that. So I think in addition to immigration and, of course, the impeachment issue and the economy, people are talking to me about term limits a lot. I would say that issue comes up probably more than about any other. And I'm not surprised when you consider 87% of the American people support term limits.
Well, and that points to it being a bipartisan issue, which is why it's also something that a lot of the Democratic presidential candidates are bringing up as well. So to that end, what do you think are some other bipartisan issues that you would be willing to work with Democrats on?
Criminal justice reform. Again, President Trump has shown leadership on that, but that receives strong bipartisan support. I am a very passionate believer in criminal justice reform. I spent 10 years of my life working for Prison Fellowship, which is the largest Christian prison ministry in the world. And I had a chance to work with Chuck Colson and also get to know ex-offenders and to visit a lot of prisons and jails. So I think that giving ex-offenders the opportunity to start their lives over, giving them a chance to become productive members of society, and reuniting them with their families and shaping criminal laws that reflect a commitment to restorative justice and to reconciliation between perpetrators and victims of crimes is very important. I also think, as I mentioned earlier in our interview, mental illness, mental health, I think is something that should unite Republicans and Democrats. We can work together on that. I think we can work together on the commitment to balance the federal budget and to set spending priorities. Yes, there's going to be some healthy debate on what those priorities perhaps should be specifically. But I do believe, Jordan, that Democrats and Republicans in Washington must come together. They must work together to put America's fiscal house and our federal government's fiscal house in order. If we do not unite on that, then your children, my grandchildren, and succeeding generations are going to pay a horrible price for this fiscal irresponsibility. So I think that this is another area where we can find bipartisan agreement.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's an issue that I'm personally very passionate about. And whenever you discuss it, this isn't every candidate, every Republican or Democrat, but by and large, it seems like the first area that Democrats go to is cutting military spending, and the first area Republicans go to is cutting entitlements. How do you get, two sides of the conversation on the same page in terms of just overall healthy spending cuts that we need at the federal level?
Well, that's not going to be an easy challenge to meet, given the ideological and partisan divisions that we currently have. But I think the way you do that is you enter into discussion with the other side about what is truly in the national interest. If one looks at the preamble to the Constitution of the United States and really focuses on that and pays attention to that. I mean, things like promoting the general welfare and providing for the common defense. These ought to be rallying cries that should unite both political parties and all members of Congress, because the founders said these are the things for which we do ordain and establish this Constitution. And while we can debate in a civil manner and a mutually respectful manner the particulars of how we flesh that out, I think we ought to start with an agreement on both sides that having a strong national defense is of vital importance. I don't hear Democrats saying that they don't support a strong national defense. So I think we start with let's appeal to that. Let's say, well, we're in agreement on what the goal ought to be. Provide for the general welfare. What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of entitlements? Well, it seems to me, let me be a little more specific, Jordan. If you get a conscientious Democrat and a conscientious Republican, then I think that you ought to find some agreement that wasteful spending, that abuse in these entitlement programs, that exorbitant entitlement spending that creates dependency is not in anyone's best interest. It's not in the country's best interest. It's not in the recipient's best interest. It's not in the taxpayer's best interest. And so can't we address that? Can't we restructure our entitlement programs and reform them in such a way that we are helping those who are truly needy and cannot help themselves? Conservatives believe and Republicans believe that government should help those who need help genuinely and are unable to help themselves. And so Democrats, I think, ought to rally around that as well. I mean, they say that they support fiscal responsibility, but let's recognize that wasteful entitlement programs that create a culture of dependency are not in anyone's best interest, and certainly not in the country's. So I would take that approach, Jordan, and you start with the general agreement, and then you drill down toward the specifics. And again, I mean, there's going to be disagreements. I'm not naive to think that, liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans are going to just, automatically agree on everything. They certainly are not. But let's have a debate recognizing that we all ought to be aiming for the same results, and that's the overriding national interest.
Well, right now, the momentum certainly seems like President Trump is on the road to re-election. So one of the questions that I kind of have for a lot of these congressional candidates is, okay, we've seen what 4 years with the Democrats under President Trump has been like. Certainly, there's been enough work done for us to get USMCA done. China phase 1 is getting done.
Right.
But as you go forward and you look at another 4 years of trying to work with Democrats under President Trump, how do you get Congress back to work?
I think it's going to be important to begin with areas of mutual agreement. and mutual concern. You make a list of those. I think entitlement reform and budgetary reform is something that the president and Congress should agree on. Let's work on things like criminal justice reform. Let the president reach out. And I guess, you say, how do we get Congress to work, quote unquote? I think that both Congress and the White House need to view a second term as a chance to start over, to respect one another's differences genuinely, and to try to find areas of consensus and agreement, and start with those. I have alluded to several areas where I think there should be. We ought to try to find agreement. And let's focus on those. And as we focus on those, we might find a way to work on some of the more divisive issues. But if a second Trump, well, let me step back here. Let me say this: if the American people re-elect Donald Trump, and I think they will, and I hope they do, then I think, and let's just say theoretically that the Democrats retain control of the House, the Republicans of the Senate. So you're going to have a divided government again. It seems to me that Democrats in Congress need to come to a place. They need to come to a place where they're going to respect this president as a legitimate president who has been reelected by the American people to do a job that most of the American people who returned him to office agree with. And they need to respect that. And they need to be willing to work with this president rather than just attack him on a partisan basis because they don't like him. I think it is possible to work with people that you may not personally like. It's not easy, and it makes it more difficult. I mean, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, they genuinely liked each other. And so they could, and they enjoyed each other's company. There wasn't this personal bitterness and animosity that we see today in Washington. And so while there were differences, I think there were a lot of things that were able to be done, and things went a lot more smoothly because Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who led the Democrats in the House, were able to to talk and to communicate with respect and treat each other in an amiable and respectful manner.
But sorry, I got to pump the brakes on you a little bit. Let's be fair. Nancy Pelosi is no Tip O'Neill, and she certainly showed that.
She certainly isn't
at the State of the Union.
She certainly isn't. No, absolutely, Jordan. Of course she isn't. And I'm not going to disagree with that for a moment. You asked me the question originally, how do we make this work? How do we move this forward in a second Trump administration? And Nancy Pelosi, let's just say that she should be. I mean, as a Republican, I hope the Republicans take control of the House, and I think we've got a good chance to do that. That's going to change the equation quite a bit should that happen. But let's just say that it doesn't happen theoretically. Well, yes, you are absolutely right. Nancy Pelosi is no Tip O'Neill, but Nancy Pelosi, as the leader of the Democrats, as the leader of the loyal opposition in Congress, if she wants to have, if it's not too late, and it may be too late, I don't know. History's going to have to judge that. But if she's interested in any kind of a positive and constructive legacy, if she has any interest in that at all, beyond, hating Donald Trump, then she's going to have to be willing, she and the Democrats in the House, to work more constructively than they have in the past, because they haven't worked constructively at all with the president that I've seen. On some issues, perhaps, I think there was some bipartisan support for the justice reforms I mentioned. But in the main, certainly generally speaking, you and I would agree, and your listeners would agree, but this has just been a partisan circus. And nothing is going to get done. Nothing. And you don't have to have a crystal ball to understand this. Nothing is going to get done unless attitudes change and approaches change. If we go right back into a situation where the White House is in one corner and Pelosi and the Democrats are in the other corner, then we're going to have 4 more years of partisan rancor and bitterness, which I will submit is not good for the country. It's not encouraging to our young people. and it is not hopeful toward our future. So it's up to the people that are in leadership to decide the approach they're going to take. Nancy Pelosi, as far as I'm concerned, hit her nadir, her low point, when she tore up President Trump's State of the Union speech on national television while he was standing right in front of her after delivering, arguably, and this may be somewhat of a partisan observation, but I'll make it anyway, it's sincere, one of the greatest State of the Union speeches in history. That was really a low point for our country, a low point for our government. It was emblematic of the personal hatred that exists. And I think, Jordan, that until we can manage to get by that, it's going to be a very difficult road. But I'm hopeful that we can. And I cite the example of O'Neill and Reagan because in history we've seen that you can have differences, you can disagree and disagree strongly. Ronald Reagan was the most conservative president in the White House since Calvin Coolidge. I mean, nobody's saying that these people didn't have convictions and didn't have sincere and major differences of what the role of government should be. But they didn't let it descend to personalities, and they didn't let it become personal. And so the hatred was avoided, the personal hatred. We got a real problem with that today, and I don't have a magic answer for that, Jordan. But I think people are just going to have to be willing to change their attitude and change their approach.
Well, and it starts with, citizens themselves getting active and getting out and supporting candidates. And as we wrap up here, Jack, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you, find out more about your campaign? Where's the website, social media, all that stuff?
We are on Twitter at Jack Wyman for Congress. Our website is jackwymanforcongress.com. And we are on Facebook at Jack Wyman for Congress. So we're on Twitter, and we have a Facebook page, campaign page, and we have our website. So people who would like to become involved or would like to learn more about where I stand on the issues and my background and my qualifications for Congress may visit any of those sites to learn more about me and more about the campaign.
All right. Thank you again to Jack Wyman for joining us. Thank you to all of our candidates who have come on and talked to us. Again, if you are a candidate and you want to come on the Big Texas Podcast, you can hit us up on Twitter and Instagram at Big Texas Podcast. Make sure you are following Texas Young Republicans on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Texas YRs. And make sure you hit the subscribe button, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get this podcast. If you hit the subscribe button, you will make sure that you will not miss a single episode. And I encourage you to actually go back and listen to some of our previous interviews with candidates. The primary is ahead on March 3rd, and it's time to get informed and know who you want to vote for. That's what this podcast is here for. We are trying to help inform voters. I especially recommend that you go listen to our interview that we released last week with State Chairman James Dickey, going through the 10 primary ballot propositions. You want to know a little bit more about those before you go to the ballot box. So that way you're not surprised, you're ready to cast your vote. You're going to be so informed and ready to fill out that whole ballot. And you're going to early vote too, right? This is where you promised me you're going to early vote, right? We're all going to early vote. That's what we're promising to do together. At least all Texas YRs or fans of Big Texas Podcast. If we can get 100% early vote turnout from the folks who listen to Big Texas Podcast, then we have done our job. Until then, friends, we'll see you down the road.